Hey, well, listen, is everybody ready to go? All good? Hey, well, listen, thank you so much for coming out here this morning. We really appreciate it. It's really exciting to be able to announce this morning our Electrify NZ policy. One small part, but a critical first step on our broader climate change policy that we'll be announcing before the election. And what we're talking about here is saying we want to deliver on our climate emissions targets and our goals and the commitments that we've made. That means that we need to move huge swathes of industry and sector from fossil fuels out to electricity, to clean, renewable electricity. But the reality of it is if we are to do that today, we actually don't have enough electricity generation coming forward. We need to double the amount of renewable electricity that we have in this country. And the good news is, on the one hand, we have abundant resources. We also have a sector that wants to make investments in renewables, but the constraint that we have is actually around regulation. And that is something that uniquely government can play its role in making sure that we're making those investments much quicker and we're actually making them in a much more coherent way. So what we've announced today is that if you want to invest in a renewable project, we're going to consent that project within 1 year, and we're going to let that consent be in life for over up to 35 years. And then secondary, we need to work on the lines and distribution and the transmission side of that equation and update some of that regulation as well. It's really important. Either we focus on delivery and outcomes and securing the goal of a low emissions future and decarbonising New Zealand, and when you go back through and work out how we get there, you actually have to get the foundational steps in place, and that means actually changing our consenting so that we can actually get this done faster and quicker and get to the end goal much, much better. With that, happy to take any questions that you may have.
Mr. Luxon, is this a commitment to repeal the current reforms of the RMA?
Look, we don't think the current proposed RMA is going to be helping to more rapidly consent renewable electricity going forward.
Will they be repealed?
What we're saying is that we see that there's a huge amount of complexity being added with another layer of bureaucracy. There are concepts in the proposed RMA 2.0 from this government that will need to be tested in courts, and frankly it's going to take too long to get things done. So we're going to be very clear by setting national policy statements, national environment statements, about actually making sure we consent within a year to get those projects up and running and going.
Very clear that you're going to repeal those acts?
Yes, we don't think that they are fit for purpose to enable investment to be able to get going to deliver on our climate goals. Makes it worse, not better. Sorry.
How many consents do you estimate that lines of renewable energy projects are there per year that this would free up?
Chris, maybe on top of that.
Sorry, just say the question again.
So how many consent for lines in renewable energy projects do you estimate per year that this policy would free up?
Well, many more than what we have at the moment is the key point. We need a doubling of generation capacity by 2050, and there are billions of dollars of investment out there from the companies that want to invest. As Christopher Luxon has said, it's just too hard. You know, it takes 8 years to consent a wind farm. It takes many years to consent the transmission to get the electricity from the wind farm into the grid, and then many years for much of the lines infrastructure to get into people's homes and into people's cars. So we just simply have to make it easier. So our anticipation is that there will be many more consents for generation, for also transmission, but for distribution. It's just that they're going to be a lot easier to get. So there'll be many more consents. It's just going to take a lot less time to get them, and it will be much cheaper for the companies involved, and that will all flow through to making it easier to electrify New Zealand.
Why do those consents take so long? Or another way of putting that, what are you going to cut out of the consenting process?
Yep. It's not so much about what gets cut out of the process, it's about the timeframes that the councils have to deal with things. So at the moment, essentially electricity generation is dealt with as a discretionary activity in many of the plans. This is a bit technical, but what we're saying is that it will become a controlled activity pursuant to the national policy statement we're going to issue within a year of taking office, and that will require every council to update their plans to make sure that electricity generation, renewable electricity generation, essentially becomes something that they can't say no to, they can only set the conditions on. And we're going to issue the conditions in the national policy statement and through the standards so that there's consistency across the country, so that a wind farm that's being consented in the Manawatu, for example, is basically no different to a wind farm in Northland or a wind farm in the East Coast or a wind farm down south. All the generators go into it knowing exactly what they need to do. The councils know exactly what needs to happen. You get that national consistency, and over time, the generators tell us that we've been consulting widely with the generators. They said basically what you need is long-term consents, and you need a short time frame to get the consents done, and you also need a national policy statement. David Parker's been consulting on a national policy statement on renewables for 6 years now. He hasn't issued it. We're going to issue one within a year of taking office, issue a consultation draft within 6 months, put it in place, and we're going to get on with the job of putting renewables in place in this economy.
So what will happen?
Sorry, you go.
So what's going to happen to those plans that are in place for the 8-year process when you switch over to the 1 year? What will happen to those?
Councils will have to update their plans essentially after the national policy statement is issued, and there'll be a short transition time frame, obviously, and there are renewable power stations that are consented now. That's fine, they just roll over. There are actually hundreds of megawatts of consents for renewables in the system right now. They'll just roll over. But the key point is this: we can't just rely on what's consented now. We need a massive increase. If we're going to double renewable electricity generation by 2050, we have to massively increase it. Transpower says we're going to have a 70% increase in electricity demand by 2050, and all of the expert evidence from the Infrastructure Commission, from the Climate Change Commission, from the government's own expert modellers suggests we cannot get there unless we change the planning system.
Yeah.
So this is evidence-based policy based on what industry says, but also based on what the government's own advisors say we need to be doing, and that's why we're going to do it.
So do you have cross-party support for this? And you think that even if you don't get into government next year, that you'll still have a chance of getting this through?
Look, what I'm telling you, we haven't had a chance to talk to other parties about it, but I just got to start from first principles. What's the problem we're trying to solve for here? And let's get the foundational steps right. We can talk a lot of bumper sticker and headline, but the reality is we haven't seen a plan to actually hunt down the emissions and actually reduce them. And what we've got to do is start here. We've actually got to build this foundation of actually getting the regulatory side of it under control. We are really blessed, as I said, we have fantastic natural resources, but we have to cut the red tape in order to deliver green, clean energy. It's so important. And we've got a sector that actually wants to invest $30 billion over the next 25 years in renewable electricity. And so we want to be able to accelerate that if we're serious about getting our emissions curve down, which we want to do really as fast as we possibly can. If we're serious about powering up ferries right behind us here and moving them across to electricity, we know what that does to our emissions profile as they run on fossil fuels today. That requires us to be able to create an abundant source of renewable electricity. We need to double the amount of renewables we have in this country if we are to move big sectors across from fossil fuels to electricity. That starts with regulation, starts with a great environment where we can actually use those resources, and it starts with a great sector that wants to make those investments. From our point of view, you don't need then Lake Onslow costing $16 billion with government taxpayer-funded money funding that. We have a sector that says they want to make those investments, and that money can better be deployed on upgrading our public services on things like health and education.
Just turning to the question of red tape and excuse my squinting.
Sorry, it's the sun behind us, yeah, sorry about that.
Should we be cutting red tape or reducing the time it takes to deal with some projects, especially things like geothermal, that really need to be built safely and need to be managed in a way that aren't exploitable or exploited?
Look, be under no illusion, we have actually turned New Zealand into a place of bureaucrats rather than can-do. When you see that actually the costs have actually increased for consenting of 140%, when you actually see that the time for resource consenting has blown out by 150%, we are doing this stuff to ourselves. We declare that we want to have ambitious climate change goals and we want to meet our commitments, which we definitely want to be able to do. We should be trying to work out how we can accelerate that and even do that faster. But you can't just declare that and then actually not follow through with the actual supporting actions that enable us to deliver on that goal. And that's why I'm saying 140% increase in cost, 150% increase in time is utterly, totally unacceptable. It's not. No, it's not. We're going to make sure it's safe. But what I'm saying to you is many countries are on a transition from fossil fuels to renewables. But when you go visit other small advanced economies and you say to them it takes 8 years to get consent to build a wind farm and 2 years to build it, that is utterly unacceptable in a global context as well. When you want that capital to be invested here in New Zealand to help us achieve our goals, that's really important. So just taking a step back, we have great ambition. But we do very, very poorly on the execution side of it. And we are a government that's going to be focused on tasks and getting things done to deliver those outcomes and those big goals.
Coal use already decreased for electricity generation 74%.
Sorry?
74% last year. Coal use decreased as electricity generation.
Sorry, I misread the question. Heard the question.
Doesn't that say that New Zealand's already on the right track?
Look, what we've seen over this period of government is an increase. We've had up to 3 times the amount of coal being imported to power stations to generate electricity. We need to be able to make a significant big investment to double the amount of renewable electricity that we have in this country to be able to meet the demand that we see as we transition this economy from fossil fuels to electricity. So for us, we are deeply, deeply committed. We've got all these great positive conditions with us, great environment, great industry that wants to make investments and capital. We've got to empower it and unleash it and accelerate it by getting rid of the red tape so we can power up clean green energy. It will be. No, our message is we want to continue to see encouraging uptake of EVs, but we actually, as we think about the curve and where this thing goes in a forecasting sense over the next 25 years, we need to really make sure we can actually double the amount of renewable electricity we have in this country. So you can talk 100% renewables. What's much more important is that we actually double the actual quotient and amount of renewable electricity. So deeply committed to our goals. First step on many things that you'll hear us announce and talk about between now and the election, but this is one of the enabling bits that sets the foundation in place to enable all those other things to happen. We just would encourage New Zealanders to naturally, they're going to be incented to want to make those conversions. And one of the things we have to do for them is to be able to provide a doubling of renewable electricity so that it actually becomes cost attractive and it's effective for them to actually make that transition and lower their total energy bills. And so that transition is up and running. Let's keep going with it. But what we can uniquely do as government and what we need to focus on is the enablers. What can we do that the market can't do? What we can control at this point is our planning laws and make sure that they are fit for purpose. We give all the safeguards and all the security that we need, but we actually need to do a lot better. It is unacceptable to take 8 years to consent a wind farm and then 2 years to build it. We want that happening faster. I'll let Simeon talk to EVs because we'll have more to say about that in coming months.
Yeah, look, today's announcement is about saying if you're going to drive electric vehicles, we need to have the electricity to be able to transition. We're going to electrify the ferry fleet behind us. We're going to need the electricity to be able to power that. If we're going to electrify the bus fleet, we need the power to be able to do that. And so we have more to say around electric vehicles in the future. But what we are saying is the electricity to do that is critically required. And also there's a number of other announcements as part of this package to help incentivise EV charging, which includes the rules and regulations, which is prohibiting that uptake of EV charging network as well. And that's a critical component to it. There's a lot of money out there which wants to be invested. Government needs to get the regulation right so that we can get on and get things done.
That's something we could potentially look at. We are saying to them you have to basically make decisions within that 1 year time frame. I think it's also important to recognise that some of these projects under the existing RMA get decided by things like the Environment Court expert panels. They get called in. The stuff gets really technical really quickly. So some are dealt with by council, some are dealt with through different other processes. So we'll potentially look at that, but we're setting the very clear message to councils by way of a national policy statement that we're being very directive from central government. We need more renewable generation. We need to double it by 2050. This is critically important for New Zealand to meet its net zero ambitions. Doing nothing is not an option. We have a low emissions future right there in front of us. All we need to do is seize the opportunity, and what we can do in central government is unclog the planning system so that billions of dollars can flow into clean energy, which will grow our economy and decarbonise our economy. Well, ultimately, generators that want to make an investment in a wind farm, for example, and deal with landowners, that's a commercial decision for the generators and the people who own the land. The zoning decisions are over to councils and, in some cases, central government. But the commercial decisions about where and when things are built are just dealt with through the ordinary course of events. And look, what you've seen at the moment is we have wind farms in New Zealand, we have geothermal energy in New Zealand. That's existed since the 1950s in Wairakei, providing clean, renewable baseload power. It's the great advantage of geothermal. And there are people interested in building solar farms, for example. They're not going to do that by taking people's land. They're going to do that by negotiating with landowners. We're only 5.2 2 million people in New Zealand. We're the size of the United Kingdom. There is plenty of land out there. There's plenty of sun. There's plenty of geothermal energy. I come from Wellington. There's plenty of wind. And there's plenty of water in our lakes and our rivers. We are blessed with renewables in this country. We're the Saudi Arabia of renewables.
Yeah.
We just have to take advantage of it and use it. And that's what the message we're sending today.
Having this be state-owned infrastructure rather than
No,
oh,
I
sorry.
mean, I'll just say, I mean, that's the genius of what's actually happening here. And I'll just say, in your last comment, there are many farmers that are actually very, very positive about actually wind farms, for example, and actually the ones that exist today. There's often been challenges where actually, farmers actually want it and actually want more of it, and are very, very supportive of it. So that relationship works really well. But look, what we have here is a huge opportunity. We have an industry already that has looked out at its forecast and is committed to say we're going to spend $30 billion on renewable capital in this country over the next 25 years. That's fantastic. That is brilliant, because why they want to do it, they see huge commercial benefit in that in terms of good return on investments, and it makes sense for them to do so. So why on earth wouldn't we catalyse and unleash all that investment and make it easier and make it happen faster in order to actually reach our emissions goals, rather than having to have government take $16 billion to go off and do a Lake Onslow project and do it in a really heavy-handed, centralised, controlled through government, using taxpayers' money to do that. I would sooner taxpayers' money is delivered to upgrade our public services, health and education being a good starting point. So when you've got a sector and a market that wants to do it, the question for us is what can we uniquely do in government to accelerate these investments, to bend our curve, to get to our emissions goals much faster and quicker. What we can uniquely do in government is think about planning laws, we can think about network effects, we can think about research and development, the things that enable and catalyse faster investment. So, for me, it's fantastic. We've got abundant energy sources, as Chris said. We've also got a sector that actually wants to make these investments, has said so very much publicly. They need to be giving some certainty so they can actually say, I am going to do that, I'm going to get that moving quickly.
Luxon, when you're talking about the sector there, I suppose the existing generators as well. To what extent have you sort of canvassed, I suppose, foreign investors or perhaps smaller businesses, startups that are looking?
Well, look, I mean, there is a lot of foreign capital. We are interested in outcomes. We just want to lower our emissions and actually deliver on our commitments and to actually decarbonise this economy for real. We don't want bumper stickers and headlines and endless conversation about it and nothing actually happening or changing. We actually are here to get things done, and this is the goal and the outcome, and that's what drives everything else. But it's interesting, when you talk to some foreign investors who often partner with New Zealand companies and investments here, they say how difficult our planning laws actually are. And if you're sitting somewhere in Copenhagen or somewhere and you're thinking about all the opportunities you have to do invest in, say, a wind farm around the world, you come to New Zealand and you find a very calcified, molasses-driven resource consenting program. And as a result, that money goes off and chooses to go somewhere else in the world where actually they can actually get that asset built, get their return on investment. And just think about it, you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't start spending that money until you've got your consent sorted before you start doing the build. And so that money's sitting on your balance sheet, not being used, not generating a return. That's not a very attractive or competitive place for New Zealand to be. So I hope that by actually saying we're going to, for new renewable energy projects, 1 year resource consenting process, extended the time out to 35 years, that will be an incentive to get foreign capital as well as domestic capital on board. And I'd sooner have that as a problem. That's actually saying we've got such a flood of capital on renewable projects generating an abundant, more than doubling of renewable energy. Brilliant. That'd be a great problem to have.
Would you accept, though, that there might be a problem in terms of consenting something so quickly and having to, perhaps it's unpopular?
I just say to you, when we've had a 140% increase in the cost of consenting, when we've had a 150% blowout in the time it takes us to consent stuff here in New Zealand over just the last decade, that is us doing it to ourselves. We are binding ourselves up and winding ourselves up with regulation that actually we can keep it safe, we can meet our minimum, we can meet our environmental standards, we can do all that good stuff. But the way we do it is not enabling investment, and we ask why we don't get things done and why we don't start lowering our emissions. This is part of the cause of that problem. You have to have really good commitment to goals, you have to have really good problem definition, and then you need really smart, pragmatic, practical steps and actions to be able to deliver on that.
Electricity generation in your plan, but the crucial thing missing was energy storage. Wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, so what would you do?
Well, we'll have more to say about that. Chris, did you want to add anything more to that? Because we've talked a little bit about that.
Sorry, just say that again.
So
Energy storage.
Independent electricity generation in that plan, but what's missing is energy storage. How do you store it when the sun is not shining or it's not blowing?
Well, there's technology coming around that, and our policy enables energy storage. It does enable that. And the great thing about the New Zealand electricity system is you've got hydro and wind that interact, right, or interact together. So when the wind is not blowing, the way the market works, again, quite technical, but it's a highly sophisticated market. More water flows, more water is let down the hydro dams into generating the electricity, and they interact. And we've got, we spent 25 years building an electricity market where hydro and wind interact. We've got geothermal there providing base load, and now we have Huntly in the system. But the result of this policy we're announcing today is that Huntly will slowly phase off coal, and we just have a renewable system, a very near close to 100% renewable system. It's a fantastic outcome. But storage is enabled by what we're announcing today.
There are a number of batteries. There are a number of batteries being deployed around the country in strategic places, and this policy will enable that to happen much more easily and efficiently. So, that issue is going to be dealt with.
Would they be built right next to wind farms, for example, in your plan?
Well, no, they don't have to be. Actually, they're normally deployed in where the network needs it, not where the wind is blowing necessarily. So those decisions are made by the companies and with the best electricity outcome rather than the best outcome for a planner by putting it beside a wind farm.
Right.
What is National's position on the plan to standardise curbside recycling and rolling out organic waste across the country? Do you support that?
Yeah, look, very supportive of that. I mean, the devil will be in the detail, but at first blush, and what we've seen over the course of this week, supportive. Yeah.
And can you point to anything that in terms of cutting the process down for resource consents, you pointed out, of course, to my colleague that you're not immediately rolling out or plan to roll out support to the councils and the staff that are providing it. You're asking them to do more with less.
No, look, I mean, we're being really clear. When you look at our consenting process, it is a nightmare, and we have done it to ourselves. No, but there's 195 other countries on planet Earth, and many of them have much better regulatory and processes that actually deliver investments being made so we actually get outcomes for people. And so what we're saying is, rest assured, we're not looking at making sure things aren't safe, making sure we're not delivering on our environmental standards. But when you take 8 years to do a wind farm and 2 years to build it, and we look at what that takes around the world with much faster consenting times, therefore the investment gets catalysed and it gets put into the market, and therefore the emissions come down. That's what we're focusing on here. Our treaty obligations remain as they are, but what we're saying is we are going to consent within a year, and everyone needs to speed up, and we need to get things done.
Mr. Luxon, you used to raise incentives to want to make conversions before. You were talking about incentives, and you used the example of energy to power EV cheaper than petrol. Are you thinking about any other incentives for consumers? I'm thinking about retrofitting buildings. I'm thinking about making it easier to buy EVs.
We're going to have more to say as we go. This is the first step, first bite size in a broader climate change policy. But what's the first foundation, Simon, that we need to have in place is actually doubling our amount of renewable electricity and making the consenting process easier so that investment happens. Once we have that in place, that's a key part to get in place so that we can actually continue to make sure we can get that transition happening from fossil fuels into EVs. But at the moment, as I said in my speech, if we were to turn all our petrol-driven vehicles into EVs overnight, New Zealand doesn't have the electricity on hand to be able to facilitate that. So actually creating and flooding the market with abundant renewable electricity is going to lead to cheaper energy bills, as you well know, and actually make sure we can accelerate that transition quicker.
And I do have to ask, your list of electric vehicles that in your speech excluded the fastest growing electric vehicle in the country, e-bikes.
Well,
Maybe Sydney can.
yeah, we can talk about that, and we'll have more to say about our policy around EVs, and we can talk e-bikes with you as well if you'd like. But today, the first logical best step that we can make is to actually make sure that we are shrinking those consenting times down so that we can actually accelerate investment in renewable electricity. And imagine what it's going to feel like in New Zealand when we are flooded with abundant renewable energy. That's a fantastic starting point for us to do all the decarbonisation we desperately need to do into our future. Okay, guys, can I say thanks so much for your time? Appreciate you being here. All right, enjoy the rest of the day.